Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I'm going to be talking about events in my Wandering Heroes of Vogelgate campaign in order to discuss the idea of player versus player and things like that. I know I've touched on that in the past, but I want to give a specific example here and talk about it. I am going to have to go into some of the details of my campaign, which I know, sometimes people uh, hearing someone talk about their campaign can be boring if it's not done the right way. I'm going to try to keep this as succinct as possible. The situation that arose was we have a group of player characters who belong to a martial sect. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm just going to call them Stone Palace, but their precise structure is a little more complicated than that. One of the members is named Hidden Arrow, and another one who's important for this discussion is Bao Yang. Hidden Arrow is sort of the intelligence officer of the sect, and Bao Yang is like the leader. Hidden Arrow, his player took a flaw called secretly evil, and what that flaw does is it basically means you have to work against the interest of the party. It's not necessarily that you're evil. It's that your goals have to put you at odds with the party in some way. So he's been secretly spying on the party for a character named Fearless Cat, who was the sub chief of a group that they used to belong to. And the other players have begun to suspect this. For some time they've been suspicious, but in the last 2 or 3 games they've become really suspicious. And against all this, there are all these conflicts that their organization has. They have a sect war with a group called Southern Hill Sect. They killed the two leaders of their organization, and now a bunch of people want them dead for that. And they have a whole host of groups that are after them, on top of Fearless Cat, sort of becoming their nemesis. Fearless Cat had recently ordered Hidden Arrow to kill Bao Yang because of something Bao Yang had done that just completely went against all of her plans. And Bao Yang had been growing increasingly paranoid because he was anticipating, you know, all of these different actors acting against him, and he also was suspecting people in his own organization. So he put in place all these security procedures and basically cocooned himself in a security system, making it really hard for anybody to assassinate him. Hidden Arrow, because he's the information officer, knew about all this. He had all kinds of, you'd heard all kinds of things while he was off on a mission about what Bao Yang was doing. And so he planned accordingly. He made a point of having concealed needles in his sleeve. He made duplicate weapons to have on his person. He positioned agents of his to have antidotes on hand in case he poisoned somebody and needed to negotiate, but didn't want to have the antidote on himself so they could just grab it or something. So he did all kinds of little steps like this to really protect himself. And then he went back to Stone Palace sect because he was requested to do so by Bao Yang, who was basically at this point planning to kill him. And I will link to the campaigns that you can see because there's a lot more details than this, but I'm just giving you the bare bones. So he gets there and he's told to go into an audience hall. He goes in the audience hall. There are 15 disciples with rope and chains. They tie him to a chair, and Bao Yang and another character come in and start interrogating him. They basically want to get him to confess that he's spying on them for Fearless Cat. He's reluctant to confess anything, and then he progressively got more defiant and basically said, "Look, you might as well kill me. I'm just going to come back and haunt you because I've made preparations for the afterlife." And the character of Bao Yang, he bashed him in the head with a mace. And so at that point, I had to decide, okay, this guy's in a chair. Bao Yang has a really heavy mace. Do I go through with the rolls or do I just let him kill him? And my decision was, I was confident enough that the system would have it take 1 or 2 hits for him to die. And so I felt that's pretty plausible. But I was also pretty sure he didn't need to make an attack roll. I just wanted him to make the damage rolls and use any technique that he was going to employ while he was swinging the mace. But what I had him do was I had him roll for the attack, not to see if he hit, because we knew he was going to hit, but to see if he got a critical or anything like that, because that could impact damage. And he ended up doing, I think, 6 or 7 wounds in the first swing, which in this game for this character was he has 9 wounds total, so it was close to his full allotment, but it didn't kill him. So he really bashed him good, but the guy didn't die, and that gave Hidden Arrow an opportunity to flick one of his concealed needles at Bao Yang. He flicked the needle, but he made the attack roll. The damage roll failed, which meant that it didn't penetrate the skin and deliver the poison. So that attack didn't succeed. Then on Bao Yang's turn, he smashed him again and he killed him because he did like 5 more wounds, which is pretty much how I thought it should go. Something like 1 or 2 swings and he would die. Uh, I was curious though how other GMs would rule on it, so I went online and I asked other GMs, and I was very interested to see people's responses to the situation. I basically said, one player character strapped in a chair, one player character has a mace. The character with the mace, smashes in the skull of the other character. Does he need to roll? How do you handle this? I saw that what was interesting to me, and it might be because I travel in certain social circles online, and so everybody's sort of like-minded. But most GMs, they might have had different mechanical solutions, but they all kind of arrived at the same general conclusion, which seemed to be, it shouldn't take more than 2 swings for him to die. Maybe it should be one, maybe it should do two, or maybe it should be, like people were saying things like, roll no attack roll but max damage, or no attack roll but a saving throw versus death. And obviously, depending on the system being used, that could achieve different results. But anyways, I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I'm going to post links to that, but you can probably find my question online and see how people answered it. I thought it was a pretty good discussion. It was interesting to see people's takes on it. And it kind of gave me some insight into how I might approach this next time, because one thing that I felt I hadn't done when the player character who was attacking used his kung fu technique with the mace, that basically ensured that he was going to do a hefty amount of damage. But had he not done that, if he had done like if he had just say, I use my mace and swing an attack without invoking any kind of technique, in this system it would have still been 7d10 damage, I think, for this character with this weapon, but it would have technically have been closed damage, which wouldn't have done as many wounds. So I probably would have made that open damage, which would have allowed for more wounds, or done something to maximize the amount of damage it did in the one swing. But anyways, what I wanted to really talk about was, number one, that example of a player character fighting another player character, but also some of the issues that arose around it. The idea of I think that's a perfect example. And some games do have a mechanical solution for this, but I do think it's a perfect example of why rulings are important, because even if there was, say, a coup de grace mechanic like you have in 3E or something, which I think is makes total sense for this kind of scenario, sometimes the specifics of the situation would make you hesitate to just say, okay, this is how it goes. Like you need a little bit of room sometimes to adjudicate things. And I think that the circumstances, the context, everything's really important. So when I asked the question, I saw a lot of people, ask more questions like, oh, is there what kind of chair is he strapped into? Are his legs bound? Is his neck bound? Is there any chance that somebody might rescue him in the next 5 seconds? Just all kinds of questions like that I think fill in the details of the situation. And when it's that much of a player versus player type situation, I find that I tend to be, okay, I really got to be objective about this now. I'm always trying to be objective, but in that moment it's heightened, I think. And because you don't want to make a bad ruling and then have players bickering or something. Not that this group has ever really bickered over that kind of stuff, but you want people to be confident in your rulings, and you want to feel like you're being as objective as you can be. So that's why I think it's a very good example of why rulings are important, because even though I felt the system I was using had really good options in place, I still kind of needed some wiggle room to decide how to handle this. And I don't know that the way I handled it in this one situation could then be codified and applied to every single one, because every circumstance is so different. So there's that. Then there's also the question of player versus player in general, and and I think I've been saying player versus character. I apologize. Player versus player is what I mean to be saying. Um, you know, I like player versus player in my campaigns. This campaign, I'm going to link to it in the comments, is my Disposable Disciples of Bone Kingdom campaign, and I call it that mainly because I do session logs and I had to call it something, but also because that's the point. It's designed to be it's with a group of people who I know are a little bit more in favor of rowdy player characters who can sometimes go into Tarantino territory, and I think that adds to the experience. I know some people don't like that. Some people, one of the things when I've asked this question, one thing I've seen is some people always want the players to be heroes, which I understand, but I don't like that as a GM. I like a little bit more gray, and there's also the problem that can arise of, well, if the players fight each other, the players themselves might start to argue, or there might be bad blood, and that can certainly happen. I think if the group doesn't deal well with it, I wouldn't want to put up with that. I wouldn't want to be at a table with people that are fighting because one player killed another player, or one player character killed another player character. So I'd only do it in groups where it feels like it's working, and I generally check with people to make sure after the fact. So I'll even ask people in private, like, "Are you okay with how this went down?" Just so I have a sense of, if people are starting to take things personally, because I have seen that happen in groups. So it is certainly a problem that can arise. But if it doesn't arise, if the group's okay with it, if you're managing it fine, it's a lot of fun. And it doesn't have to always be about the players fighting each other. You don't want like an endless spy versus spy situation, but giving them room to play their character to the hilt, and occasionally have conflict with other party members to the point where people might actually kill each other or thwart each other's goals. It adds an element of danger, surprise. It forces me as the GM to not, like, I can very easily sort of, pass 2 or 3 sessions with a number of different scenarios that are attractive to the group, but this introduces like a new, it adds a new chemical to the mix that really keeps you on your toes as a GM. You can't just rely on the players being so focused on the dungeon that you had planned, or on the conflict with this group that you had planned, or whatever it is that you think they might be interested in dealing with that session. When these things start popping up, the session can go in a wildly different direction. I find that really engaging. I find it really interesting. And I mean, and there are a number of other ways that can happen in a game, but player versus player is a really consistent way of making that arise. So I enjoy it. I think it adds kind of like a dramatic element to the game, and it adds a little bit of a competitive aspect, which I think is fine as long as it's competitiveness that grows out of what's going on in the game. So it's not competitiveness versus player A and B, but because of things that have occurred in the game, they're becoming competitive with each other. One thing that I try to do when I'm doing player versus player, what tends to happen is the situation escalates over time, and as it escalates, I start paying closer and closer attention to things like the passage of time, resources. I just make sure that I'm really keeping an eye on all the things that could give one player an advantage over another, so that it's fair. I mean, I'm always kind of doing that, but I really put my ref hat on when players start coming to blows with each other, and I find that really helps in the end, because I think that players can tell when you are striving to not be biased, and you aren't just favoring one player because their storyline is more interesting, or and the way that I do that is, for me, the joy of the game is not knowing how things will turn up. So I like, not knowing who's gonna win, who's gonna win this battle of will in the party, because it could go in two wildly different directions depending on who's victorious. So so I think when your pleasure as a GM comes from the sort of excitement of that uncertainty, you you become less invested in this player's winning or that player winning. If you do find yourself becoming invested, then I think it's important to recognize it and keep that in check. But yeah, so that's I've probably rambled on for too long now. It's probably been like I don't know 10 minutes or something. So I'll be back on this week. I mentioned this earlier. I'll be on with my reviews. I I have a bunch of movies that I want to talk about that I just haven't had a chance to get to because of other things I'm working on. So all right, until then, I will talk to you later.